Welcome, my name is Avery Peck, and this is the third and final part of my LUT workflow series. Today I'll be covering some of the best practices for technical and creative LUTs inside Adobe Premiere. So let's jump in. So we'll start by going to our effects page, typing in Lumetri color, and applying that to our clip. Now there are two important things to understand about Lumetri. The first is that there are two possible places to apply a LUT. The first is right at the top under the Basic Correction tab, where it says Input LUT, and this is really designed for color space conversion LUTs, like converting your log footage into Rec. 709. There's also a second location under the Creative tab, where you can apply your creative LUTs. The second and most important thing to know is that the order in which Lumetri is laid out is also the order in which Lumetri processes its corrections. So everything that we do in the Basic Correction tab is processed first, and then that processed image goes to the Creative tab where we can make further adjustments, etc., etc. And that's going to become important in just a second. So let's go ahead and start balancing this footage by first applying a conversion LUT. So normally we would go to the Input LUT section, and we would apply whatever LUT we need. In this case, I'm going to apply a Blackmagic Cinema Camera to Rec. 709 LUT. And everything looks good on the surface, but if you look at the scopes, you can see that some of these highlights in the clouds are clipping. And if we try to bring our exposure back, you notice that that information is permanently clipped. Because again, LUTs are destructive, so any information that gets clipped by a LUT can't be brought back after that LUT has been applied. So we need to apply some corrections to the footage before that LUT. Now, one way to do this would be to use a second effect, something like curves, and you could try applying that before Lumetri, right here. And so if we drag down our white point like this, you can see it actually does bring all of that information back in the clouds. And this is a viable way of working, but it is going to slow your computer down a little bit because now you're processing two effects instead of one. There's also a simpler and cleaner solution, and that is instead of applying your conversion LUT in the Basic Correction tab, you can apply it in the Creative tab, like that. Now the result initially is exactly the same, right? We're just applying the same conversion LUT, but now it frees up our entire Basic Correction tab to adjust the footage before this LUT is applied, because remember, the layout of this effect is also the order of operations. So now if I bring down my exposure, you can see all of that highlight detail comes right back, and you can see it there on the scopes as well. So now I can freely balance my footage using these tools without having to worry about clipping. So I'll go ahead and reset this, and I'll just generally balance this footage. So I might bring my exposure down by about 1/3 of a stop, and maybe bring my shadows up a little bit, and give us a little extra saturation there. And that's looking decent. Now the only real downside of this method is that it only allows you to apply a single LUT. However, it's usually a good idea to split up your color correction and your color grading anyway, because you need to color correct each individual shot so that the whole sequence matches, and then you can apply a single color grade across the entire scene. And I'll show you how to do that in just a sec. But first we need to balance these other shots. So we can just quickly take our Lumetri effect, and we can literally copy and paste it, and then just make whatever adjustments we need from there. So now our shots generally match, and now it's time to apply our grade. So if you come back to your project panel, you can click on the New Item button and click Adjustment Layer and click OK. So now we can drag our adjustment layer down in the timeline and just scale this over. And if you've never worked with an adjustment layer, basically any effects that you apply to this layer affect all the other clips underneath it. So we can do our grading on the adjustment layer, and that color grade will be applied to our entire scene. So I'll go to Effects, I'll type in Lumetri color like we did before, and I'll apply it to the adjustment layer like that. And so now we can do all of our grading. So if I want to go to my creative section and apply a creative LUT, now would be the best time to do that. So I can apply any of these pre-built looks, and that look is then applied to the whole scene. You can adjust the intensity of the LUT. This is the same as adjusting the gain of your node in Resolve. So I can turn this down if I don't want the look to be quite as strong. And usually that's a good idea. Just as a rule of thumb, most LUTs are designed to be a little bit too strong right out of the box so that you have the freedom to adjust that intensity. And then of course you also have all of these other tools available to you to create whatever look or whatever grade you want. So maybe I'll warm up my highlights just slightly there. And yeah, that's looking fairly nice. The last thing I want to talk about that we discussed in part 2 is applying your creative LUTs at the beginning of the grading workflow versus at the end, because it does make a difference. And with some LUTs, like film print emulation LUTs, you typically want to apply them at the end. Now, by default in Lumetri, your creative LUT is applied at the very beginning of the grading process. And unfortunately, there's no way to change this order of operations within Lumetri. It's not like we can click and drag and reorder these tabs. So unfortunately, the only solution here is to apply a second instance of Lumetri. So I'm going to take the LUT off of this copy, and then I can basically take a second instance of Lumetri and apply that. And then I can reapply my LUT here on copy number 2. So I'll go to Look, I'll select the same LUT I was using and adjust the intensity back down to 30. And so now all of these tools on the first instance of Lumetri are operating before that LUT is applied. So again, if you're using film print emulation LUTs or something like that, and you want to apply it at the end of your workflow, this is kind of a workaround. It's not ideal, but it does work. And this leads me to my final closing point. Lumetri provides a great set of basic coloring tools to work with, especially if you're getting into coloring for the very first time. But on the other hand, it trades control and flexibility for convenience. It's designed to be a simple tool, mostly for editors who want to apply some basic looks before sending a cut off to a client or an agency. Now, you can get some fantastic looking grades in Lumetri, but ultimately, when you start diving into more complex grading processes and more complex workflows, you'll find that Lumetri is going to hold you back more than it's going to help you. So ultimately, if you really enjoy color grading and this is something that you want to pursue further, I highly recommend getting your hands on a dedicated piece of software, something like Resolve or Baselight and Nucoda. There are lots of options out there. Resolve, of course, is the most accessible, being that it's free. But ultimately, when you use a dedicated tool like that, you'll not only find that you have much more control and freedom to experiment, but it's actually much more convenient once you learn the software, because now you're using a tool that is purpose-built for this type of work. Anyway, I hope you guys enjoyed this tutorial. Be sure to stay tuned for more tutorials in the future. Until then, my name is Avery Peck, and I'll see you all next time.